So in this clip, we have Andrew Bustamante being interviewed by the YouTube channel Trigonometry. Andrew Bustamante is also a former CIA agent who has been on several podcasts in the past.
And just enforcing that the two sides have to live together and they have to have some sort of economic cooperation.
So Bustamante here is saying that would be a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict would be a Palestinian state where there's economic cooperation with both sides, which, by the way, already happens. Israel provides jobs for many Palestinian workers to work in Israel every day. A lot of the food, economic power, economic support comes from Israel anyways, and yet they are still at war and they are still hating Jews.
But Hamas are extremists. They do not want the state of Israel existing. They're rabidly anti-Semitic. So how can you negotiate with that type of government who are Islamic fundamentalists?
I would argue that part of what you're repeating right now is actually rhetoric and not fact, right? So there is a fundamentalist element to Hamas, but Hamas is also the legitimate elected government in what was Gaza, and even now in the West Bank, you see an increasing rise of support for Hamas.
The problem with Andrew Bustamante is his moral relativism, in which he says because Hamas has a lot of support for the people from within both the West Bank and Gaza that they're legitimate. Yet, just because they're legitimate in terms of the eyes of the people who are there, does not mean they're not evil and they're not fundamentalist, which his moral relativism is really showing.
Isn't 100% accurate. They still have legitimate grounds to be there because they have been policing, enforcing, maintaining health, safety, and the movement of humanitarian.
Again, his moral relativism is just super clear now, because he just says because the Hamas has been responsible for all the social services and for stabilizing a government within Gaza, that they deserve to still be in power, even though that they committed the worst atrocity on Jews since the Holocaust. The fact is that if the Nazis had the same with his rationale, so the Nazis should also be in power because they also provided social services, healthcare, and a stable government for people to live in.
I guess my pushback to that would be just because a government is legitimate does not mean it's not extremist. So, for example, in Venezuela, they elected Hugo Chavez, and I think most people, apart from the nutso people on the left, would agree that Chavez was an extreme figure and he had extreme policies.
Again, it's in the eyes of the beholder.
This moral relativism is going to destroy the West. He's saying everything that happens, whether it's good or bad, is really more morally relative, and it's in the eyes of the beholder.
What would you call the United States and our commitment to capitalism? The United States, we are deemed a terrorist organization by the Iranians because of our extreme fundamentalism, right? What would you call a state where there is no division between church and state? Because that's Israel.
When it comes to understanding how economics works and power dynamics in governments and how they get what they want, Bustamante is actually correct in it. But where he fails is his morality and what's right and wrong. And so when he sees this whole moral relativism where Iran would see the U.S. as a terrorist organization, which is wrong because the U.S. is not only a model for freedom around the world, but also does not impose its beliefs or ideas on its own citizens or arrest people for not dressing a certain way like Iran does, or fund terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. In his mind, it's all morally relative. So his whole claim that Israel is a state that doesn't separate between church and state, somewhat true, somewhat not. The fact is that Israel has certain laws that go by Jewish law in terms of marriage and divorce, but they also protect the same thing for Christians and Muslims as well. Most of Israel's laws are secular laws, and they're based on British common law. Also, you'll see many university people who study law in Israel that they will look at American court cases in the Supreme Court. So the idea that Israel is just a halachic Jewish law state is purely just wrong. And it's surprising that someone who spent so many years in the CIA wouldn't be able to do a simple search and actually research the topic before opening his mouth. In fact, you have a former CIA agent speaking with moral relativism and nuances about something that's so simple as right and wrong show how dangerous the West is right now, and how they can just be overpowered now by Muslim extremists because they will just let them walk into their country. You see the photo right here is Gadi and Dina Levy, who were actually murdered by a terrorist in Hebron on a Shabbat in 2003. They were just walking, minding their own business, and an Arab terrorist blew himself up to kill them because they were Jewish. This is a monument to Shohevet Pas, who was a baby who was murdered by a terrorist in Hebron, was shot by an Arab sniper. And the fact is that this moral relativism is detrimental because people just don't get it. Even people with important jobs are supposed to protect the American people don't get that the kind of people that they're saying should have the ability to have their own state are the ones that would just murder them just because they're not the same religion.